We are continuing our study on schema-based relationships. We've previously gone over our schema-based constraints, and we are continuing this. We've looked at domain constraints, key constraints, and we've looked at different kind of constraints. And now we are specifically going to be focusing on constraints on nulls. A constraint specifies that null values are or are not permitted. And so this is basically saying that it's based on user requirements. If the user has something that they allow to be null, it can be null. If they don't want any nulls, there can be no nulls. It's really up to the user. So we have an example here. So let's say we have an employee name, right? And we have a company, and it stores an employee database, right? Well, if you store an employee database, you'd probably want to go off an employee's name. Now, if an employee's name is null, you can just reasonably assume that they're not existed. So you would want to not really keep this in your database. So that means you would just take this out. You don't want a constraint to be null. So that means once we define an employee, we must have a value for the name for that example. We don't want it to be null. And that's going to be our constraints on nulls. Next, we're going to look at entity integrity constraints. Entity integrity constraints is when no primary key value can be null. So I just fixed this, but if we have, for an example, like A, B, and C, none of the primary keys inside of here, we've gone over primary keys previously, and those videos can be found in the playlist link below the like button, can be null. And this is because the primary key value is used to identify individual tuples in a relation. Remember, tuples are like rows for our tables. We want to involve a single relation only when we have this. And so that's going to be our constraints on nulls, and that's going to be our entity integrity constraints. Next, we're going to do a whole section on referential integrity constraints. We're still going to be in the schema-based constraints. And after this video, we're going to look at application-based constraints. Well, technically after the next video, we will be looking at application-based constraints.